Gordon, we're going to be discussing today a real crisis at the Church of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury, John Welby, is facing growing calls to resign after a report found the Church of England covered up the abhorrent abuse of more than 100 boys and young men for years at the hands of a serial offender. John Smyth, who died in 2018 before facing justice, recruited victims at a Christian summer holiday camp in Dorset until 1982. Financial support from church officers facilitated Smyth's relocation to Zimbabwe in 1984, where the report found he continued to abuse. He moved again to South Africa in 2001, where again the abuse is thought to have persisted until his death.
The review said Archbishop Welby could and should have reported the case to authorities when details were presented to him in 2013. Archbishop Welby said he had no idea or suspicion of this abuse before 2013, but acknowledged that he had personally failed to ensure it was investigated. And this is John Welby being questioned about his lack of action last week on Channel 4 News by Kathy Newman.
Are you ever torn between doing what's right and protecting the institution?
Never. That, with the question put like that, I know, because I'm always thinking I don't give a hang about the institution. I really, genuinely don't. If this report was a lethal blow to the institution, so be it. God will raise up another institution.
So your failing is incompetence rather than cover-up, your personal failing?
Yes. Incompetence, yes. All right, I'll give you that one. Yes, it's not cover-up. There has never been a moment where I have wanted to cover up.
Incompetence admitted there by the Archbishop, but as we said, he is refusing to resign. Giles Fraser, the broadcaster and vicar of St Anne's Church in Kew, southwest London, was on the Today programme on Radio 4 this morning and did call again for Welby to go.
I'm afraid he's really lost the confidence of his clergy. He's lost the confidence of many of his bishops, and his position is completely untenable.
There's two different things going on here, isn't it? First of all, there's the general view, and I wonder what you think about whether it seems plausible that someone like John Welby, as he says, didn't know anything about these allegations before 2013. And then there's a second bit, which is what on earth did people do after 2013? So let's take them in turns. Is it plausible that someone like John Welby didn't know about Smyth, who had a hell of a reputation?
Well, the Makin report uses the word unlikely. It said it's unlikely he didn't know in the 1980s. And that seems to me to be right. He was in the circle of trust of this group of conservative evangelicals. It was an open and not very well kept secret in this area. A report was published that was circulated amongst conservative evangelicals in 1982. Now, this is extraordinary, and the Archbishop, was on the Christmas card list, exchanged Christmas cards, continued to fund his mission, even when this ghastly man went to Africa and continued to abuse children and young men. It really is, it really doesn't add up.
That was Giles Fraser being interviewed by Amal Rajan on the Today programme. We just wanted to make clear the position of the Archbishop himself. A Lambeth Palace spokesman told the Times newspaper that the Archbishop reiterates his horror over Smyth's abuse and has, quote, apologised profoundly both for his own failures and omissions and for the wickedness, concealment and abuse by the Church more widely. The spokesperson added, he had no awareness or suspicion of the allegations before he was told in 2013, and therefore, having reflected, he does not intend to resign. Well, to unpick some of this controversy at the Church of England and to discuss how tenable the Archbishop's position is, we're joined now by Janet Eastham. She's our religious and social affairs editor who's been covering the story for the Telegraph.
Janet, thanks for coming in. What do we know about John Smyth, and when did he first become involved with the church?
So John Smyth is he's a reader in the Church of England, and from sort of the 1960s onwards, he was involved in running these sort of Christian camps in Dorset, and he was also a barrister. and it's become clear that his abuse started at around that time. He was essentially recruiting young men from the camps and his association with the Church of England, and the abuse was extremely violent, sort of physical, sexual abuse. This continued in the UK until the early 80s, at which point, once the abuse was discovered, he was financially supported to relocate first to Zimbabwe, where the abuse occurred again.
Yeah. And Justin Welby went to these camps as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did. So in the 1970s, there were 4 years where you have both Smyth and Welby at the camps together. So he would have known Smyth from around that time. They both were working there.
As ever with investigations into offences and paedophilia, I think what people are really shocked by is the length of time. We're now talking, Janet, in 2024. This is the 70s and the 80s. So many institutions have been on this journey where historic allegations, as they are called, come to light. It doesn't appear, though, that officially Archbishop Welby knew about this until 2013. I just wondered, Janet, can you throw any light on why it would take so long for such horrific allegations to reach the top of the church? What was that 2013 moment?
So the 2013 moment was essentially where Justin Welby says now that he was formally made aware of the allegations against Smyth. So that's the point at which he now says he became aware. But when you're talking about how did this go on for so long, that's the thing that this latest report really starts to kind of make very clear, that actually senior church leaders were aware from before 2013. And one of the most controversial findings or suggestion from the report is that the reviewers find it sort of unlikely that Welby himself was not aware of some of the concerns prior to 2013. Now, Welby says that he had no suspicion or no awareness of any of this, of any of the abuse being as serious as it is prior to that point. But the findings of the report essentially call that into question.
There was a 1982 investigation, wasn't there, as well? What does it say about that?
So that's the first time when a sort of formal report was produced within the church detailing abuse against boys and young men. And this was the report that essentially appears to have triggered Smyth's departure from the UK to Zimbabwe. Now, Justin Welby says, that he would have had, no awareness of this. It's interesting, though, that he actually was living for a time with the man who wrote that report. And there is in the report that came out last week, a remark from one of the interviewees that they overheard a grave conversation between the man who wrote that report and Welby, I think back in the late 1970s. So it seems like a lot of the people I've been speaking to today say that they find it hard to believe that Welby did not have considerable or some knowledge prior to 2013.
Where he has admitted blame and incompetence, as we heard in his interview with Cathy Newman on Channel 4 News, is post-2013. So what happened after 2013, which is, there's the before, it was raised with him, and then there's the after. And in the aftermath, the 2013 moment, not enough was done, and even he admits that, but still he doesn't think he should resign. What happened after 2013?
Yes, this is the real contradiction in his current position right now. So in 2013, he was made aware formally of the abuse allegations, and initially given some reassurance that there was that it was being looked into by the police, or that it had been referred to the police. I believe he then later became aware that that actually wasn't the case. And what should have happened, the report has concluded, is that Welby himself, should have ensured that this was pursued by the authorities. He should have done everything, really, to have made sure that that actually happened. But he didn't. And what the report actually concludes, and this is, I think, the most, well, it is all extremely tragic, but one of the things that is just very, very hard to take on board is that from that point onwards until August 2018, John Smyth was still living in Cape Town and potentially abusing people in that time. And so now the Archbishop's in a position where, had he taken action, young men, boys maybe, could have been spared further abuse.
So no cover-up, he says, but he was incompetent. Who is it that is calling on him to resign, Janet? Just talk us through that.
So 3 members of the General Synod have now set up a petition on, I think, change.org to call for his resignation. And I should add, actually, survivors of Smyth's abuse are also calling for this. This is not, this is, and I think Welby's going to find it very hard to continue with his particular position in that context. But yes, so 3 members of General Synod have come together with this petition. And what's interesting is that the 3 clergy members, they are all from different parts of the church. So one is an evangelical, the other is quite high church, and the third is much more kind of radical member of the synod. And what they are basically saying is that they believe his position is untenable. And they think that the knowledge of the abuse in 2013 and for him to have done nothing, that makes his position untenable and that he ought to resign.
As you say, Janet, we should remember the victims in this, and also some of the victims, as you say, that could have been spared. I've interviewed the Archbishop a couple of times. Some of the criticisms of him are that rather than dealing with the correct governance of the church, which he's obviously said he has failed at to an extent through these appalling cases that we're speaking about, he has rather spoken about political issues, about equality or slavery reparations. I mean, he even made some comments around Brexit and inequality in the country. Are there some deeper issues here for the Archbishop that he's facing about the broader happiness within the church about his leadership? This is clearly the important front and centre issue, but is it a lightning rod for disquiet about the way he's leading the church more generally, given that he has been seen as a very liberal Archbishop and not at all, he has been seen as a very liberal Archbishop?
Well, I put that to 2 of the people who are kind of leading this petition this morning, and the initial response was very much to push back on the idea that this is sort of simply the straw that broke the camel's back. One of the things they said to me is, it should be enough that the Archbishop of Canterbury failed to stop the worst serial predator in the Church of England's history. That should be enough for him to have to resign. But they did also say, it is true to say that people feel the church has not been well led under him. And one of the members of the General Synod who is leading the petition is a man called Dr. Ian Paul, and I was speaking to him last week about a report that came out from the Archbishop's Commission, which essentially called parishioners racist. And this was kind of looking into the diversity and equality and inclusion metrics for the Church of England. And when I'd spoken to Dr. Paul last week, he was describing this sort of a nonsense and quite offensive and a distraction, really. And so that's obviously in the back of his mind. I mean, this is one of the things that people are really annoyed about, very angry about, in fact. The other major issue being the fact that Welby has been accused of basically making up church doctrine on the hoof around same-sex marriage or same-sex blessings. So that's in the mix, and I think that might, to an extent, account for the complete silence when it comes to hearing anyone coming out in support for him right now. But I think that those signing the petition and those organising it feel that his failure to act on the abuse should alone be reason enough for him to resign.
And just briefly, do you think he is going to resign now?
It does feel right now impossible for him to carry on. It does feel right now like he will resign over this, but he hasn't yet. So the fact that he has refused calls to resign makes me feel like it might not happen straight away, but all I can really go off is what I'm hearing from members of the General Synod, and they say that it is untenable. And I think the most important thing to come out of the Macon Review was what they've described as the killer phrase that Welby had a moral responsibility to act in 2013. Regardless of the procedures that were in place, it was that personal moral responsibility which he fundamentally failed on.
It's a pretty unique set of circumstances, isn't it, for the general members of the General Synod to be calling for the Archbishop to go, which, as you say, puts his position, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, very, very precarious. What next then? The petition is there.
Yes.
Does the General Synod get, and forgive my ignorance, can it sort of vote, or can it do a submission, or is there more that can be done beyond a petition?
So I think the thing that might be going on behind the scenes, or the thing that would probably need to happen, would be for some action from the bishops. So what we haven't seen, and maybe we won't see, is bishops openly calling for him to resign. We would need, for a motion to go to the synod, it would need to have support from the House of Bishops. At the moment, what we've heard from the safeguarding bishop and the deputy safeguarding bishop is a refusal to answer the question of whether Welby should resign, which has been very striking. But whether things are going on behind the scenes, we don't know. But perhaps that would be the next step, would be some action from the bishops to move this forward.